Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Mark Bennett, the Research Manager at the Royal Armouries, and welcome to the 11th talk in our Winter Lecture Series. The Royal Armouries is the UK's national collection of arms and armour, operating from 3 sites across the country. Our main base in Leeds, our historic home at the Tower of London, and a Victorian fortification outside Portsmouth, where we display the bulk of our artillery collection. If you'd like to find out about future events, get closer to the collection through our online catalogue, or keep tabs on our site's reopening, please go to our website, which is royalarmouries.org. Most of these talks have focused on the objects in our collection, but as a museum, we also acquire and preserve archival material relevant to the nature of the collection. We have over 500,000 documents of one kind or another, including records from the Small Arms Factory at Enfield and the Ministry of Defence's Pattern Room. We have the company records of Wilkinson's sword, an invaluable resource for researchers looking to link a particular blade to a particular officer. We also have personal papers from collectors and authors, for instance, the extensive note of Charles Fuchs, former Master of the Armouries, including his scrapbooks and drawings. And today's talk look at one of the set of personal papers that we hold. As with the previous talk, our speaker today has pre-recorded the talk just in case of connectivity issues. The sound will be as loud as I can make it, so be sure to turn it up at your end if necessary, and apologies if we deafen you when we come back in. There will be the usual opportunity to ask questions after the talk. As normal, if you're watching on YouTube, please type your question in the chat box to the right-hand side of your screen. If you're watching via Zoom, you'll find a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen where you can type questions. And as always, while we can't guarantee to get through everything, we will cover as many as we can. So with the necessary preparation out of the way, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, Philip Abbott. Philip, do you want to say a quick hello for those who aren't in gallery view?
Hello, everybody. I hope you're going to enjoy this afternoon's presentation. It's a result of some research I've been doing off and on for the last 10 years, and it's by no means finished. But it's quite a good story, and I'm sure you'll find it both informative and entertaining, and I'll hang around afterwards for some questions. Well, good listening.
Yeah, and Philip's sort of too modest to blow his own trumpet, but just so people are aware of his background and his experiences. So he's the museum's archives and record manager with responsibility for the archival collections that we've talked about. And he has published in his own right on a range of topics, from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's campaign for body armour in the First World War to William Siborne's model of Waterloo. But as he suggested, today's lecture draws on the papers of the Dawson family to explore the career of one of its members in the Napoleonic Royal Navy. So without any further ado, let me hand you over, albeit in pre-recorded form, to Philip Abbott.
Hello, my name is Philip Abbott and I'm the Archives and Records Manager at the Royal Armouries in Leeds. And in this presentation I'm going to be examining the career of Captain William Dawson, one of 3 brothers who fought in the Napoleonic War, and what this tells us of life in the Royal Navy at this time. The basis of this presentation is a collection of papers purchased by the museum at auction in about 2000. And the quote relating to a fair prospect of another Nelson rising comes from a letter written to William's father, Pudsey Dawson, by his close friend John Barrow, informing him that his son had won a great naval victory off the coast of Ceylon and that the details would be published in the London Gazette in a few days' time. But first, let's look at the lineage of the Dawson family, who originally came from the Upper Wharfdale Valley in the West Riding of Yorkshire. The Dawsons are recorded as yeoman farmers in Tudor times in the village of Holden Gill. Then, in the middle of the 17th century, they acquired by marriage Langcliffe Hall near the market town of Settle, and at the end of the century they acquired Bolton Hall in Bowland in the same fashion. Pudsey Dawson, William's father, heralded from the junior branch of the family, and so had no expectation of inheriting the family estates. He therefore became a merchant, first in London and then later on in Liverpool. It was only when his uncle died childless in 1786 that he became heir, and when his father died in 1794 he inherited. He married Elizabeth Ann Scott, the daughter of an English merchant living in Amsterdam, and they had a total of 12 children, 11 of whom reached adulthood. By the convention of the time, Pudsey Dawson Jr. would inherit the family estates. The other sons would have had to have found their own way in life, joining one of the socially accepted professions, such as the army, the navy, the church, medicine, or the law. The daughters would have had to have found suitable husbands. When most of William's brothers reached the age of 12 or 13, they were sent away to school. But not William. He decided to join the navy. Perhaps he was more practical than academic. Or perhaps, because he'd grown up in Liverpool, which by the end of the 18th century was the second largest port in Britain, at the centre of a busy local and regional trade, and also the heart of the slave trade, William had listened to the stories of distant lands and was interested in a career at sea. Pudsey Dawson, although many of his friends were deeply involved in the slave trade, did not participate directly in the trade himself. When William joined the Navy in 1795, the war with revolutionary France was only 1 year old, and there were plenty of opportunities for fame and fortune. This is the typical career path for a young gentleman entering the Navy at this time. A handful went to the Royal Naval College in Portsmouth, but most signed on as a volunteer first class. If you were the son of a naval officer, you could join at the age of 11. If not, you had to be 13. William lied about his age, which was not uncommon, and joined a few months short of his 13th birthday. After 3 years at sea as a volunteer first class, learning the duties of a seaman, William might be rated as a midshipman, and then, after a further 3 years, be eligible to take his examination for lieutenant. You had to be at least 19 years old to take your exam, and you had to have a minimum of 6 years sea time. If you passed the exam, you had to then wait to receive your commission as lieutenant. And the next step on the ladder after that was promotion to post captain. The captains of naval ships in the 18th century had the authority to select their own volunteers and to rate their own midshipmen. They thus exercised great influence over a young man's career, both personally and through their circle of naval friends. William's father was a well-known Liverpool merchant and was a member of the town council. He was therefore strongly connected to the sea, and either knew Captain Thomas Parr personally or was a friend of a friend. In any case, Parr agreed to take William on board his ship the Malabar as a first-class volunteer. This is one of a number of pictures which illustrate a contemporary book, The Progress of a Midshipman, exemplified by the career of Master Blockhead by the artist George Cruikshank. This plate shows Master Blockhead packing his trunk to go to sea. William travelled down to London with his father by coach, and before joining the ship, they went shopping for everything he needed. Amongst the papers in the museum, we have a list of the items that William took aboard the Malabar with him. This includes his uniform, which consisted of an undress coat and waistcoat, 2 blue jackets, 2 flannel waistcoats, 2 pairs of blue pantaloons, 1 pair of braces, and 6 coat and 12 waistcoat gilt buttons. There was his bedding, a mattress, pillow, blankets, sheet, and a quilt. Then there were personal items, handkerchiefs, combs, a clothes brush, a dozen towels, soap, and luxuries such as sugar and tea. There was a case of instruments, which along with a quadrant and copies of Hamilton Moore's Navigation and the Mariner's New Calendar would help him learn how to become a seaman. He also took on board the Bible, a prayer book, Man's Catechism, Gilpin's Catechism, an English dictionary, Dodd's Beauties, a French grammar, and an abridgment of Roman history. At least if he got shipwrecked, he would lack for nothing, providing he could save his sea chest. William also had some pocket money, and the sum of 10 guineas was left with Captain Parr to help promote his career. At the beginning of the war, Britain had sent an expedition to the West Indies to capture the various French islands. However, after some early successes, the troops suffered dreadfully from fever and the campaign ground to a halt. In 1795, the government decided to send out reinforcements and ordered a convoy to gather at the Cove of Cork in Southern Ireland. The Malabar was one of a number of ships used as troop transports. The convoy sailed on the 10th of February, but was scattered by the gales. Most of the ships found their way back to Cork. Only a few managed to reach the West Indies. The convoy sailed again 2 weeks later, and after a quiet voyage arrived in Barbados. Thomas Parr was then placed in charge of the naval contingent of an expedition to seize the Dutch colonies of South America, on either side of the Demerara River near the present town of Georgetown. They surrendered without a shot being fired. Shortly afterwards, Parr arranged for William to go aboard the frigate Aimable, where there would be greater opportunities for him to gain experience. The papers in the museum contain long lists of the officers on each of the ships that William served on, with the dates of their discharge from the ship, their promotion or their death. The list for the Malabar shows how lucky William was. Many of his shipmates would die in the West Indies of fever. William's new captain was Gemmet Mannering, who had recently been promoted to post captain and ordered to take command of the Aimable. Discipline on board ship was governed by the Articles of War and were divided into 4 main categories: offences against God and religion, crimes against the king and the government, actions which violate and transgress the rights and duties which men owe to their fellow subjects, and military offences such as cowardice in the face of the enemy, neglect of duty, disobedience. Punishment was harsh, flogging or in some instances a court-martial, followed by death. This illustration from Cruikshank shows a typical flogging. Captains also had the authority to issue their own orders for the conduct of their ship and to see that these were enforced. The Aimable was either a very unhappy or an ill-disciplined ship. In the course of the commission, Mannering ordered no less than 30 floggings, anything between 12 and 3 dozen lashes at a time. As a volunteer, William would not have been flogged. He might have been made to kiss the gunner's daughter, stretched over the breech of a gun and caned, or he might have been mast-headed, sent to the top of the mainmast until he had learnt his lesson, like Midshipman Blockade. William experienced his first action in July 1796, when the Aimable engaged in a running fight with the French frigate La Pensée. She escaped by taking refuge in the neutral Danish harbour of Tortola, and despite Captain Mannering's challenging the French captain to come out and fight, he declined to do so, and the Aimable had to sail away. When Mannering was forced to give up command of the Aimable to a more senior post captain, he went on board the small frigate Babette, and he took William with him. Most of the actions noted here are recorded in Mannering's official dispatches, which were later published in the London Gazette. In April 1798, William was forced to return home suffering from scurvy, a lack of vitamin C when fresh food was in short supply. He returned home, possibly on the transport ship Weymouth, which arrived on the 9th of June. It was just as well. The Babette was later lost with all hands. The Navy was well aware that fresh food was vital to combat scurvy and other diseases. When in port, ships would take on bullocks and fresh vegetables and, of course, fresh water. Officers and men had the same ration, but the former were able to supplement their rations with luxuries and to keep chickens, pigs, goats, etc. for milk, eggs and meat. However, the problem of storage on board ship meant that most food was dried or salted. The use of lime and lemon juice to combat scurvy was well known by this time, but it was not until 1795 that supplies of lemon juice were organised by the Navy. Whilst he was convalescing at home, William was entered on the books of the Zealand commanded by Captain Parr. The Zealand was the guard ship at the Nore, the anchorage at the mouth of the River Thames. Although William signed on in July, he only joined the ship in September, but this gained him valuable sea time towards becoming a midshipman, if not strictly according to the regulations. Parr used his influence to arrange for William to go on board the frigate Fishguard, which was serving in the Channel Fleet. Unfortunately, William only arrived on board after the Fishguard had fought a successful action against the French frigate Immortalite. William had now completed 3 years' service at sea and was rated as midshipman. William's new captain was Thomas Byam Martin, who would prove to be one of the most successful frigate captains of the war. Martin was responsible for ensuring that midshipmen like William learned all aspects of seamanship, navigation, fighting the ship, and the general responsibilities of the sea officers they hoped one day to become. These are the duties of a midshipman. When the ship was not at quarters, he would understudy the officer of the watch, command a subdivision of the ship's company, and assist and supervise procedures whilst in port. When at quarters or in action, he would assist the captain or the first lieutenant on the quarterdeck, command a section of guns on the quarterdeck or the forecastle, command a section of guns on one of the gun decks, command a ship's boat, or command a prize crew. The primary duty of the Channel Fleet was to prevent the combined French and Spanish fleets from sailing, and if they did so, to bring them to action and defeat them. They did this by blockading the main French naval base at Brest and the smaller ports of Rochefort, Ferrol and Vigo. The main part of the blockading squadron consisted of ships of the line, which remained out of sight of land. A squadron of frigates was kept inshore to warn of any attempt by the enemy to break out. One of the most hazardous duties of the inshore squadron was to carry out a close observation of Brest, braving the rocks and the sandbanks and the enemy batteries, to count the number of enemy ships. The Fishguard carried out this task several times over the next few years. This is the record of an observation made in October 1799. The official report was made by Captain Charles Cunningham of the Stag, who was the senior frigate commander. The Stag observed 43 ships of the line, 7 frigates and 4 corvettes, and this tallies almost exactly with Captain Martin's observations. The inshore squadron also used to carry out raids on the enemy coast to capture or destroy convoys of merchant ships bringing naval stores to Brest, or to destroy enemy warships. During the summer of 1800, the Fishguard was involved in a number of such raids on the Brittany coast. This is Captain Martin's report of a cutting-out operation on the night of the 11th of June, in which 11 ships were captured and another 40 burnt or run aground. 2 further operations occurred against enemy convoys, one off the Quimper River and the other in Noirmoutier Bay. The fast-sailing frigates were also used to patrol the sea lanes, either operating individually or in pairs, searching and seizing ships carrying contraband to France and Spain, and protecting ships trading with Britain from enemy privateers. The seized ships, known as prizes of war, were sent into the nearest English port, usually Falmouth. William's first independent command was as prize master of a French sloop laden with salt, taken in November 1799. This is a copy of his sworn statement, stating that the French ship was seized strictly according to the regulations. The High Court of the Admiralty reviewed the cases of ships seized. If it was found that they were lawful prizes of war, then the ships and their cargoes were auctioned, and the proceeds distributed amongst the officers and men of the ships who had captured them. Prize money was a great incentive, and some frigate captains made huge fortunes. This is the statement of account for the sloop brought in by William, which grossed over £700, from which the naval agent then deducted his expenses. As a midshipman, William's pay was £1 15 shillings 6 pence per lunar month. He made £30 in prize money in 1799, and 3 times that much in 1800. At the end of 1801, William took his examination for lieutenant. He had to prove he had the minimum 6 years sea time, and this document lists all his ships, his different ratings, and the amount of time he had served in each. As you'll see, those few weeks on the books of the Zealand were very important. William also had to prove his age. He had to be at least 19 years old. This is a letter from the Reverend John Smith of St. Thomas's Church in Liverpool, which states that William was born on the 17th of March 1780, indicating that he was 21 years old. In actual fact, he was born on the 17th of March 1782 and was only just 19. The document on the right states that William was eligible to take the examination before a board of 3 senior captains. This was an oral exam in which he was posed a series of questions on seamanship, and provided he answered correctly and without any hesitation, he passed. Here is our old friend Master Blockhead, newly promoted to lieutenant, with the all-important epaulet on his right shoulder, indicating his new rank. I think the quotation is quite apt for a naval officer at this time. Of course, it's incomplete, and should say, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. This will certainly be the case in William's career. Even though William had passed his examination, he was still a midshipman until he received his first commission. William's commission has not survived. This example is for another officer, Thomas Gillespie. William was commissioned as a lieutenant on board the frigate Caroline, which was then refitting at Woolwich Dockyard. But a few days later, the Peace of Amiens was signed, which brought to an end the French Revolutionary War. The government started to take warships out of commission, and many experienced officers were placed on half pay. William's old patron, Thomas Parr, had died in 1800, but with the help of Captain Thomas Byam Martin, he was commissioned as lieutenant on board the frigate San Fiorenzo. That summer, the San Fiorenzo attended His Majesty King George III at Weymouth. Shortly afterwards, she sailed for India. The San Fiorenzo, commanded by Captain Joseph Bingham, had been ordered to join the East Indies Squadron. and she sailed from Portsmouth on the 23rd of October 1802, and after breaking her voyage at Gibraltar and the Cape of Good Hope to deliver dispatches, she arrived at Madras in April 1803. War with France had broken out once again, but the news didn't arrive in India until September. Large parts of India at this time were controlled by the Honourable East India Company, a private company intent on making profits for its shareholders. The headquarters of the company were in the city of London. It had its own docks. It built large merchant ships known as East Indiamen to carry trade goods. It had its own army, over twice as big as the British Army. In 1805, approximately 20% of all goods imported into Britain came from India. The value was just over £6 million. The reason why India was so important was because it lay at the heart of all the trade routes across the Indian Ocean and provided the link between Europe and the Far East. To protect trade, the Navy maintained a number of bases, the main ones being at Bombay, present-day Mumbai, and Madras, now Chennai. The French colonies in India had all been seized during the previous war, and the nearest French naval base was at Port St. Louis on the Ile de France, now Mauritius. From here, French frigates and privateers could threaten British trade. In 1806, the British seized Cape Town from the Netherlands, France's allies, to secure the route around the south of Africa. As lieutenant, William's main duties were watchkeeping and commanding a division of the ship's crew, whilst at action he would be in charge of one of the gun batteries. But William's aim was to become the first lieutenant, and thus give himself the best chance to be promoted to captain. His position as lieutenant was based on seniority, the date he was commissioned. These are the other lieutenants on board the San Fiorenzo, with the dates of their commission and their relative position as first, second, third or fourth lieutenant on the ship. In May 1804, William advanced the position of third lieutenant, when John Beach was court-martialed for disobedience of orders and contempt, and dismissed from the service. On the 27th of January, Beach had gone ashore at Tillicherry in the ship's cutter. Captain Bingham had reminded him of his standing orders that he was not to retain the boat but to send it back to the ship immediately. He was concerned that the seamen might get drunk and that some might even desert. He ordered Beach to return to the ship at sunset when a boat would be sent for him. Beach failed to send the cutter back and the men got drunk. Then, in the evening, when Midshipman Pocock went ashore in the jolly boat to collect Beach, he was still at dinner, and when he finally got to the boat, one of the men had disappeared. He went in search of the man and eventually found him, but as a result he returned to the ship late. Bingham interviewed Beach on the quarter-tack and then sent him to his cabin under arrest. William was a material witness at the court-martial, having been the officer on watch when Beach returned. Beach was found guilty of disobedience and dismissed the service. The court-martial proceedings can be found at the National Archives. Thousands of men were required to man the Navy, and the ships were always short of hands. This was particularly a problem on the foreign stations. In England there was a permanent body of men known as the Impress Service, which would seize able-bodied men for naval service. These were supplemented by press gangs from ships, who were empowered to impress seamen, seafaring men, and persons whose occupations and callings were to work in vessels and boats upon the rivers. But in practice anyone was fair game. The San Fiorenzo's wartime complement was 260 men, but in May 1804 she had only 180 men on board, with another 20 ashore in hospitals. So when the East India Convoy arrived in Bombay at the end of May, Captain Bingham sent the press gang on board to recruit. French frigates and privateers operating out of Port St. Louis were a constant menace to British trade. On the 13th of February 1805, the San Fiorenzo encountered the French frigate Psyche off Seringapatam about 250 miles north of Madras. She was accompanied by the privateer Equivoque and the Thetis, which she had just seized as a prize. After a long chase through the night, the San Fiorenzo sent a boat aboard the Thetis, which the French had abandoned. Then, at 8 p.m, she finally came within gunshot and an action ensued. A few minutes after 9 p.m, the Psyche fell on board the San Fiorenzo, and William led a boarding party onto the French ship. In the hand-to-hand fighting that followed, he was severely wounded when he was speared with a boarding pike in the chest. The Psyche got clear and the fight continued. After a brief pause in the action to make repairs, the San Fiorenzo was about to reopen fire when the French captain struck his colours. The San Fiorenzo lost 12 men killed and 36 wounded. The Psyche 57 men killed and 70 wounded. When an enemy warship was captured, it was usually purchased for naval service, unless it was too badly damaged and beyond repair. The capturing ship received prize money for the ship and the naval stores she contained. She also received head money, a fixed rate for every man taken prisoner. This is a prize register from the National Archives, which shows the prize money and head money awarded for the capture of the Psyche. As a lieutenant, William's pay in 1808 was £8 8s per lunar month. His share of the prize and head money would have been about £400 after the naval agent had taken his costs. In 1807, George Nicholas Hardinge became captain of the San Fiorenzo. He and William were about the same age, and they became very good friends. William was now first lieutenant and could turn his attention to being promoted to post captain. Promotion was on merit, but with so many lieutenants and so few ships, it helped if you had either influential friends in the Navy or had distinguished yourself in action with the enemy, preferably both. As first lieutenant, William was now responsible for the manning of the ship, the rating of the crew and the petty officers. He ensured that the quarter bill was made up. He divided the crew into watches. He provided over the wardroom, and in action he assisted the captain on the quarterdeck. At the beginning of 1806, the frigate Piedmontese arrived at Port St. Louis to reinforce the French squadron. In June she encountered the East Indiaman Warren Hastings. East Indiamen were heavily armed, and the captain, Thomas Larkins, put up a fight which lasted 4 hours before he surrendered. When the French boarding party commanded by First Lieutenant Charles Moreau came on board, Captain Larkins was attacked and stabbed, as were a number of other officers and members of the crew. Larkins and his crew were imprisoned on the Ile de France, but when they were released he made a sworn statement of the incident, which appeared in the English newspapers in India. Admiral Pellew, Commander-in-Chief of the East Indies, sent copies of the statement to every ship in his command. Captain Eperon of the Piedmontese was so incensed with the allegations that he himself wrote a long retraction, which was also printed in the English press. At the beginning of March 1808, the San Fiorenzo was in Gaul, at the southern tip of Ceylon. A convoy of East Indiamen was daily expected from Bombay, and she put to sea to meet them. On the morning of the 6th, she sighted the 3 East Indiamen to the northeast, and shortly afterwards a strange sail bearing down on them. She altered course to investigate. The stranger proved to be the Piedmontese. The Piedmontese carried more guns than the San Fiorenzo and had a heavier broadside. She also had more men, as she needed to provide prize crews for any merchant ships that she captured. The San Fiorenzo was also slightly undermanned, as she had a number of members of her crew in hospitals. I created the following slides a few years ago, and I've been meaning to go back and make some changes, but they will do to give you an idea of how the events unfolded. The following account is based on William's logbook in the National Archives. The Piedmontese realised she was facing a British warship and tried to avoid action, but the San Fiorenzo was able to close within gunshot range, and there was a brief fight which lasted about 10 minutes. The Piedmontese then made more sail and moved out of range, with the San Fiorenzo in pursuit. The pursuit continued through the night, and then at daylight the San Fiorenzo closed the range once more. The Piedmontese realised that action was now unavoidable. The two ships fought broadside to broadside, with the range gradually decreasing to about a quarter of a mile. The standard fighting tactics of the Navy at this time was to fire at the enemy's hull to dismount the guns and cause casualties to the crew. The French tactic was to fire at the masts and rigging to bring them down and disable the enemy. They could then either finish off their opponent or withdraw from the action. After an action of about 2 hours, the Piedmontese ceased fire and broke off. The San Fiorenzo had been badly damaged and was unable to pursue, but the crew set about making repairs. The repairs were completed shortly after daybreak, and the San Fiorenzo set off in pursuit once more. The Piedmontese tried to bluff it out by hoisting false colours, but at 4 p.m. battle was rejoined. Captain Hardinge was killed in the second broadside, and William took command of the ship. He changed tactics and started to fire at the Piedmontese's masts and riggings to prevent her from escaping. After nearly 2 hours, the French frigate had been badly damaged, and Captain Eperon surrendered. When the San Fiorenzo's boarding party went on board to take possession of the ship, the First Lieutenant, Charles Moreau, took a pistol and shot himself to avoid capture. The action had lasted off and on for 3 days, and was the longest naval fight in history until the Second World War. The San Fiorenzo lost 13 men killed and 25 wounded over the course of the 3 days. The Piedmontese lost 48 men killed and 112 wounded. William's men were exhausted, but he had to man 2 ships, one of which was badly damaged, and to guard over 400 prisoners. William brought the Piedmontese into Colombo on the 12th of March under tow. He recalled the reception he received in a letter to his sister Mary, both at Colombo and later at Bombay. I was received at Colombo very courteously indeed. General Bailey had a large party to meet me, and I was desired to lead Lady Rodney to table. She has 2 sons, lieutenants in the Navy. Her questions were innumerable, and I never heard any woman's tongue go so fast as hers did. Notwithstanding her rattle, it was not sufficient to keep me awake. I fell asleep before the cloth was drawn, and remained so very comfortably for 2 hours. And later at Bombay, for the moment we made our appearance off the port, boats innumerable came off to take us in tow as we were towing our prize in. The Admiral's band came on board and played The Conquering Hero, Britain Strikes Home, Rule Britannia, and I don't know how many other tunes. Every ship cheered us as we passed them, bands of music afloat. In short, the whole harbour was one clamour of joy. Captain Hardinge was buried with full honours in Bombay Cathedral, and later a magnificent monument was erected. William, his officers and his men all contributed. The action brought William fame. The Bombay merchants and insurance brokers were so grateful, they presented him with a magnificent sword. He was also presented with a sword of the value of £100 from the Lloyd's Patriotic Fund. Lloyd's Patriotic Fund was established in 1803 by a group of merchants and insurance brokers, and is one of the oldest surviving armed service charities in the world. Named after Lloyd's Coffee House in London, the fund aimed to provide grants to those wounded in action and to provide annuities for their families. The fund enjoyed tremendous popular support, raising over £170,000 through public subscription by early 1804. Lloyd's also awarded prizes to Royal Navy officers who went beyond the call of duty. The prizes were either beautifully decorated and gilded swords, a vase, or cash. The swords were engraved with the details of the action for which they were presented. The action also brought William more prize money, probably something in the region of about £2,500. The papers in the museum include details of the silver dinner service he purchased with some of the proceeds. It cost over £800. And although Hardinge's gallant death captured the public's imagination, he received recognition from his peers in the Navy. His official dispatch was forwarded to the Admiralty by Admiral Pellew and published in the London Gazette. It was then reprinted in newspapers all over Britain. And of course William gained his promotion, first to the rank of commander, with the expectation that after 12 months he would be confirmed as post-captain. The Admiralty issued a commission appointing him to the command of the Colombe, but this was merely a paper exercise to confirm his promotion. The San Fiorenzo required repairs after the action, and so Pellew gave him commissions as acting post-captain in the frigates Wilhelmina and then the Dédaigneuses. In a private letter to Sir Richard Bickerton, the First Sea Lord, Pellew advised him that Lieutenant Dawson is a prodigious fine young man of 25. I think he promises as much as I ever met in talents, zeal and gallantry. He is as conspicuous for his goodness of heart as for every other officer-like acquirement. I speak disinterestedly, for I know him only by his merits. Dawson is a skilful navigator, an able seaman and a gentleman. This distinguished action marks him for future service to our country's glory, and we cannot have too many of his breed. The Dédaigneuses was ordered to escort the East India Company's Bombay fleet to China. The voyage was largely uneventful. Whilst William was waiting for the convoy back to India, he was permitted to cruise off the coast of Laconia, or Luzon. Here occurred one of the more unusual events of his career. On the 17th of September, the Dédaigneuses came across a brig, and William sent on board a party to take possession. She proved to be the Harrington, which had been seized by convicts at Port Jackson in New South Wales. Some of the convicts were taken on board the frigate, and others were left on the brig. The latter escaped when the Harrington ran aground, and they swam ashore. The leader of the convicts, Robert Stewart, posed as a former lieutenant in the Navy, and was allowed a degree of liberty on board the frigate until he attempted to escape, after which he was placed in close confinement. William later transferred the convicts to the frigate Phaeton, which was en route to India. At Calcutta, Stewart posed as the natural son of an aristocratic admiral, who was guilty of no more than a crime of honour. He promptly escaped from the frigate Union, which was to return him to Australia, and disappeared completely. William returned to Macau, where for the next few months he supported Admiral Drury, who had arrived with an expedition to take possession of the port in an effort to further British mercantile interests in China and to foil those of France. It was common practice for Navy ships to carry gold and silver on behalf of merchants, and shortly before she left Whampoa, the Dédaigneuses took on board $344,000. The standard fee for this was 2%, and William received $6,880 on the safe delivery of the specie to Penang. He then took on board more gold and silver on behalf of the East India Company, who had negotiated a special deal with the Navy of 1%, but this still earned him a further $6,440. William was now in command of the Blanche, but on receiving news of his promotion to post-captain, he gave up the command to return to England. Admiral Drury, who had taken over as Commander-in-Chief of the East Indies Squadron, was sorry to see William leave, and wrote to the First Lord of the Admiralty, The Blanche, which Captain Dawson was in, is the least desirable ship in India and will shortly go home. Had she been otherwise, I should have great reluctance in parting with a young man, of whom I have the highest opinion in every regard, and as I consider him an officer of great promise. I sincerely hope your lordship may soon be able to employ him, and to send him once more under my command. We already know the personal friendship between Pudsey Dawson and John Barrow, the second Secretary of the Admiralty, but both Admiral Pellew and Admiral Drury in their letters noted the personal interest in William's career shown by no less than Lord Mulgrave, the First Lord of the Admiralty. On his promotion, William himself observed, "Oh, that my father could have foreseen this event! What anxiety, trouble, and expense it would have saved him! And though I have every reason to be one of the happiest beings that was ever created, still I should have been better pleased if I had got my step from my father's interest, after his unremitted exertions to push me forward." William's command of the expedition was purely nominal. He had to be appointed in command of a ship to confirm his promotion. He had to receive a physical commission. When he returned home to London, he was awarded the command of the Piedmontese and ordered back out to the East Indies to bring her home. A few weeks later, he was presented to the King himself at a levee at Buckingham Palace. We also know that he was engaged to be married at this time, but we don't know to whom. William would have gradually risen in seniority in the list of post-captains, and if he'd stayed in the Navy, might even have gained flag rank as an admiral. But we shall never know whether he was indeed another Nelson. His life and career were sadly cut short. On his return to India, he was struck down with fever and died. He was buried with full military honours at St. Mary's Church in Madras. Well, that is about as far as my research on William Dawson has taken me for the present, but there are still many questions I would like to answer. If you are trying to find information about a naval officer from this period, then here is a list of some of the sources I have used. If you would like to know more about life at sea at this time, then there's an extensive literature on the subject. If you prefer a little light reading, then my own personal favourites are the Hornblower novels of C.S. Forester. There was a very entertaining Hollywood adventure film in the 1950s, starring Gregory Peck, and more recently a television series starring Ioan Gruffudd. If you want a little more detail, then I would recommend the Patrick O'Brian novels, The Adventures of Jack Aubrey, two of which were also turned into a very good movie starring Russell Crowe.
Okay. Yes, so we'll start quietly for the benefit of those who need to turn their volume back down. But you still with us, Philip?
I am, yes.
Great, perfect. So, I mean, I guess my question from the perspective of the museum, these are fantastic documents, and in the Dawson collection, there are also officers, army officers' records as well. Do you happen to know how these came into our collection?
We purchased them at auction from Bonds in Oxford. It was about 2,000. I can't remember how much taxpayers' money we paid for them now. And we principally bought them because of William's papers. We were quite interested in obtaining a naval perspective on things, not knowing that there were also the papers relating to his brothers Henry and Charles, which are equally interesting and which I've published.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not Arms and Armour, is it? That's a separate publication, I think.
It is a separate publication. Yeah, it was privately published.
And just to set it in a bit of context, the Royal Armouries, the Royal Navy has got a phenomenal advantage in the period. So somewhere in the region of 90 French ships of 50 guns or more captured, with 0 British taken and not recaptured. What clues are there in Dawson's life as to the roots of this superiority?
I think the main superiority lay in the fact that the fleet was permanently at sea.
Mhm.
You know, the men in the ships were very hard, very well trained, very well organised. Whereas for the most part, the French ships spent much of their time in port and only came out very rarely. So when they came up against the British fleet, the Royal Navy, even though they might have had superiority in numbers, they were inevitably outclassed when it came to quality.
Ooh, we've just had a question from Katie Malpass, who asks, who was the Mary Littledale to whom William wrote from Bombay? Was she a love interest? Or is that something that needs to be done in later research?
Mary Littledale was actually his sister.
Ah.
And yes.
Good. I'm just thinking about the very start of his career. So, you know, obviously a large family, Liverpool merchants. Are these middle class, upper middle class that we're thinking about?
His father hadn't inherited at that time, so he was very much sort of lower middle class, well to do, but not well off. And they had a house in Park Road, I think, near the docks, which was quite a small house, given the size of the family and the fact that William's grandfather also lived with them after he retired. It was only later that they moved literally up the hill to the much bigger house near the cathedral in Rodney Street.
Because, I mean, you know, we saw the expenses for supporting one son in the Navy, but of course, two sons in the Army as well. The need to purchase commissions, although I suppose they might have won them by merit. But was there ever a period before this inheritance came in that they were struggling for money? Do we know?
Yes, I think that was one of the reasons why the family left London. Living in London was just too expensive. And they went north and they went to Liverpool where there were more opportunities and the cost of living was probably cheaper. Yeah.
And you mentioned money left with Parr to promote his career, which was separate from his pocket money, I think. Do you know what that might have been spent on, used for?
I think actually that was a gift to Parr.
Okay.
But they always refer to these things as in order to promote his career.
Yeah, so not quite a bribe, but verging on it.
All these things were quite common at that time. To reward somebody for taking your son on board ship and giving him an opportunity.
One question I had actually about a number of questions about the Piedmontese San Fiorenzo action. So Hardinge obviously had died, Dawson had taken over. Who got the captain's share for that action?
That would have gone to William. There was no posthumous award.
Yeah, so obviously quite, well, I don't know how the Hardinge family was placed, but potentially quite a big financial hit that they could have done without, especially when the main breadwinner's gone.
The Hardinge family were actually very well off. Lord Hardinge was a general under Wellington. He was then Secretary of State for War. This is George's uncle. And went out to India as Governor General. So they weren't spare of a little cash. And they also have a connection with Harewood House as well. So they didn't miss the money, I don't think.
And I think you mentioned 48 killed over 3 days. Now there's quite a lot of time in between the action, obviously, when the ships are manoeuvring or repairing, but it does seem surprising that more weren't killed. Is that figure roughly typical for actions of the period, or?
Yeah, the body count was remarkably low, but of course that doesn't take into account how many might have died from wounds later on or died in hospital. Those are very much the figures that are given immediately after the action.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, quite a lot of celebrations when it came in. Was this a period of particularly bad news for the Royal Navy, either generally or in that specific area?
Well, the Piedmontese had a notorious reputation following Warren Hastings' affair, and of course capturing even a single East Indian merchantman was probably worth somewhere near £250,000. So it was a big hit for the company and the insurance brokers. So it's no surprise there were great celebrations when the ship came in. And if you remember the celebrations in Portsmouth when the task force returned from the Falkland Islands, it's pretty much the same thing.
Thinking about Dawson's career, obviously we've got a lot of testimonials later in his career to his talent, but is the speed of his rise fairly typical, or are most officers sort of stuck at midshipman for quite a while?
He's lucky, and he clearly has. His father is clearly influencing his career behind the scenes. He takes his lieutenant's exam almost as soon as he's able to do so. He doesn't have to wait. And that probably suggests somebody pushing his career quite firmly from behind. Again, when peace is declared in 1802, a lot of officers were laid off, but not William. William got a ship almost immediately, and one that was going out to the Far East, where he could get more experience. So he jumped ahead of a lot of people at that time and got a year's experience that others wouldn't have got.
That's interesting, actually, because for a lot, certainly on the army side, which is the one I'm more familiar with, India is generally not a particularly sought after posting unless you are, if you can't keep up with the expenditure in the UK. Is there much desire among Royal Navy officers to get assigned out to India because of the potential greater prize money?
Yeah, you probably wanted to serve on board a frigate rather than a ship of the line, because there was more opportunities for prize money. And then, of course, in the Indian Ocean, there was this French base at Mauritius with privateers and frigates working out of. So there was quite a lot of opportunity for action and for promoting your career that you might not have got on somewhere like the North America station at this time, or even in the Caribbean.
Of course, a lot of officers who were on the North America station and not expecting much got a big surprise in 1812.
Yes, they certainly did. And of course, the Royal Navy was quite embarrassed in some of the actions in the war against the big American frigates.
A question on the carrying of gold, and obviously the captain gets 2% or 1% depending on if it's an East India Company one. That's purely for the captain? That's not shared with the crew, I take it?
He has the option of sharing some of it with the crew, but it's purely for him. But I would think that some captains, given that the crew knew what was on board, would have rewarded the crew in some sense.
And another question from the audience: given his prize money, do we have any records of William's estate when he passed away?
No, we don't. He was back in England very briefly before he went out to India again. And we don't know where he invested the money. He might have bought a house. We know he got engaged. We don't know who to. We've got some figures of the cash he had with him in India when his father tried to tidy up his affairs after his death. But we don't know what happened to the rest of the money. It may just have gone to the rest of the family.
Great. And I guess one last question, certainly from me, is you've mentioned that this is ongoing research. What are the future plans?
The future plans is to hope that the lockdown ends and I can get back down to the National Archives to basically tidy up the research down there. And I need to get back across to Liverpool to the record office. I went there about 10 years ago and it was closed and access was restricted. But I'd quite like to find out a bit more about Pudsey Dawson, William's father, particularly he was mayor in 1799, and see what he was up to. He was a great patriot in his own right. He arranged for he helped recruit a volunteer regiment in Liverpool in 1705, of which he was colonel-in-chief. and the colours were actually presented in his house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and are there any other soldiers, sailors lurking in the Dawson papers, or is it Pudsey Dawson that's the main military figure remaining in them?
William is the naval son. His two other sons, Henry and Charles, were in the 52nd Regiment Light Infantry, and they served in the Peninsula and Waterloo, and they're quite interesting. The last son, Edward, disappears. No idea where he went to. You lose track of him in Find My Past Ancestry. He turns up briefly in Bermuda, but after that, nobody seems to know where he went. So you never know. There's a skeleton in every family's cupboard.
True, but I mean, you know, the cost of keeping up a family with 4 sons must have been phenomenal. It's no surprise that some people, you know, go from riches to rags, effectively, I guess.
Yeah, Pudsey Dawson was under no obligation to provide for the younger members of his family, but he clearly did, and he clearly gave them every opportunity in life. William didn't go away to school, as far as we know, but Pudsey Jr. went to rugby, Charles and maybe Henry went to Eton, Ambrose went to an Oxford college. He ended up in the clergy. So he did give his sons every opportunity for advancement.
Yeah, all very solid, middle-class, safe professions, I guess. Nice. Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of the questions, and because it's about 3 o'clock, we should probably knock off and let people get back on with their days. But thank you very much to Philip for today's lecture. Absolutely fascinating insight into the Napoleonic Royal Navy. And thanks also to Robbie for producing the event behind the scenes, and to you, the audience, for taking time out of your day to attend and for the questions you had for the speaker. If you've got any object-specific questions, any archival-specific questions, or anything else we weren't able to cover today that you'd like an answer to, inquiries@armories.org.uk will get you in touch with one of our collections team. So our next event will take place in 2 weeks' time on Thursday, the 18th of March, when I'll be talking about the gift of a revolver and a sword by an American merchant to a British general during the Indian Rebellion of 1857, and what it tells us about social and military trends in the mid-19th century. If you're curious as to what it's going to look like when I'm on the other side of the fence, as indeed am I, then please sign up for the talk through our website, which is royalarmouries.org, or follow us on Eventbrite if you'd like to see all the future events that we host. In the meantime, thank you again for spending time with us today, and I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time.